I want to start by giving a quick introduction to myself because I am well known in the crop sector, but new certainly to the livestock side of things and the value-added processing side of things. So, a quick bit about my background and my connection to the funding world is after my PhD, I was the executive director for the Alberta Pulse Growers. So back in 2008, I sat on the funding consortium table representing a crop commission. So I've seen things through that lens. After I had my daughter, I worked as an applied research scientist at the provincial government. So I was an applicant through proposals submitted to the funding consortium. So I've seen it from the applicant's point of view. And then I transitioned to Alberta Wheat and Barley at the time, now Alberta Grains, and certainly played a role in reviewing proposals in that. And now I'm with Ardor. So I have seen the whole funding consortium experience through many different seats. And I think we've got some good insights to share with you to just help increase the chance of success when you're submitting an application. And I do want to flag, yeah, we are, as Amanda said, recording this presentation. She will be emailing out the link to the recording within a few days. And then we're also going to aim to get this on the Funding Consortium website. So with that, let's get rolling here. So I want to explain to everyone what the Funding Consortium is. It is a group, it's an informal body with no legal standing comprised of 18 independent organizations. And I'm going to list them so that everyone gets a good sense of who are the players at the table, who is reviewing proposals, who you are writing to. So we start out with Alberta Beef, Alberta Beekeepers Commission, Alberta Canola Producers Commission, Alberta Chicken Producers, Alberta Grains, Alberta Innovates, Alberta Pork, Alberta Pulse Growers Commission, Egg Farmers of Alberta, Manitoba Crop Alliance, Potato Growers of Alberta, Prairie Oak Growers Association, Results Driven Ag Research, Saskatchewan Barley Development Commission, Saskatchewan Oilseeds Development Commission, Saskatchewan Wheat Development Commission, the Western Dairy Research Collaboration. Previously, it was just Alberta Milk on at our table, but now they do have this research collaboration representing the 4 Western provinces, and of course, Western Grains Research Foundation. So we do have both crop, livestock, and not only Alberta, but also our friends in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. So you can see it is a very wide and diverse group of funders that are coming together. And from our terms of reference, it's each of these 18 members have their own strategic priorities, their own investment mandates. But what we are doing by coming together in the AFC or the Ag Funding Consortium is it's a one window approach so that you as applicants, if you are covering a topic that maybe covers priorities that 4 different funders address, you can submit that in one place. So it's a way to coordinate funding activities, but they're still independent decision making. So you can see we're going to go through a little example here where the PI or the principal investigator, we got a well-known scientist there, and just showing you the setup here. So at the LOI review stage, of course, LOIs opened 2 weeks earlier than usual. They opened on February 18th, so the window is now open for you to submit. And these 18 member groups, when that LOI day closes on April 1st, the group of us all look at, let's say there's 100 different proposals on our Excel sheet, and we review the list of requests from applicants. And then we appoint a liaison to an individual project. So if, let's say, I'm seeing Boyd Morey's face shining back at me, he has a proposal on flea beetle, then, quite possibly Alberta Canola might be the lead liaison on that project. And the liaison is the point of contact between the Ag Funding Consortium members and the PI of the project. And this liaison will, if there's questions that need to be brought forward to the PI, clarity is needed, the liaison will communicate with that. individual. So let's say we've got Boyd Mori here, we've got Alberta Canola here, and other possible funders would be Sask Oilseeds, Ardar, and potential WGRF. And Boyd, let's say he didn't quite get his, Boyd, I'm just picking on you a little bit. Let's say you didn't get institutional approval and you've got, you're like, it's come in 3 days. That communication would be through Alberta Canola. So it's that opportunity for back and forth there. If we have questions between the group of funders interested in a project and the PI. But I want to really emphasize the member organizations, that each individual member organization has their own process for selecting LOIs, and LOIs are selected. It is closing April 1st, and into mid-May is when the group is going through those 100 LOIs or however many are submitted. This, review process may be done by staff or research committee. So we're going to have that list of 100, and we have a meeting and we say, these 3 funders are interested in seeing more on that project. And that is how this is done. So that might be done by staff, but it also might be done by farmer research committees. So that's an important consideration to know, that even at this LOI stage, your work might be being evaluated by producer research committees. And this review of applications, this is more so true at the full proposal stage. The process that your full proposal goes through may include some or all of the following. So a staff review by individuals with diverse skill sets. So maybe someone on staff in a provincial or a national group might have knowledge about animal health or things like that, or production efficiency. So individuals with diverse skill sets are reviewing it from a staff level. The technical review, which I think the scientific community is very familiar with, also, of course, called peer reviews. Not all funders in the funding consortium require this, but most do. There also might be an industry relevance review. So going to a national organization potentially and saying, what are the market access issues that this particular project might help us address? And then, of course, there is that producer research committee review. So that is where you've got those direct farmers from those member organizations reviewing the proposals. And then the funders, those 18 groups, are talking to each other and saying, we see value in this, and sharing those learnings to make sure really informed decisions are made. And then the final stamp of approval, it usually goes through the research committee, which is that farmer group led by staff, and then often an additional board review. So it is not the staff making decision, but it is those farmers, who are actually vetting these funding decisions. So we want to emphasize that. And I think just given all of these processes, it's really critical that when you guys are writing your funding proposals, that you're cognizant of the fact that you're writing to a very wide audience with diverse skill sets and diverse expertise. And at the same time, you're still making sure you need to pass a peer review, as that's required by many of the different groups that are funding here. So you don't have an easy job by any means, but I think it's important you understand who that audience is that you're working or who you're writing for. So a little bit more on the funding consortium at that full proposal stage. So we also, we talked about the liaison that we identified, but then a peer review lead is identified who obtains and funds the peer reviews. There may be an instance where your liaison changes just due to availability, expertise, conflict of interest. So don't be alarmed if someone else starts contacting you about your project. We do want it to be one individual, but partway through that, there is potential for that to change. And then similar to that LOI review stage, I mentioned, maybe we had 100 LOIs and let's say 50 go forward to full proposal stage. The members then have their meeting after all that information is gathered from the individual groups to go through, and let's say we have a proposal from a beef researcher on genomics, and we say funder one comes up with 25% of the requested funding, and the next funder comes up with 75% of the funding in there, we would have a situation where a project would proceed. If we had another proposal, though, where one funder puts forward 15% and another funder puts forward 5%, we're only at 20% of the final request for funding. So a proposal in that situation would not go forward. So it is very much a roundtable in which we make those decisions. Another thing that I do want to flag that is a little bit new is one of our members does require contracting in place by that December 31st timeline. So in certain circumstances, if that funder and other co-funders have gone through the peer reviews and are able to make a funding decision prior to that Christmas announcement time, they may be contacting you with funding decisions of a confirmation, so the contracting process can go forward quickly. So that's in very rare cases that will happen, but just wanted to let people know for transparency that is a possibility. And then after, if you do end up in the situation where your full proposal was declined, if the PI does go back to your liaison and asks for feedback, then the liaison is going to actually seek feedback from, let's say there were 4 groups reviewing your proposal. That individual will compile the responses and provide constructive anonymous feedback to you as the PI on that. So just a little bit more of behind the curtain look at how this does work. Now we're going to get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of submitting an LOI. So if you go to fundingconsortium.ca and you click on the apply to the AFC, it is going to take you to the Argo website. And many of you are probably familiar with this. You probably already have an account. If you do not, you will register here, set up an account, and then you'll be able to submit your online application. So while this is an ARDAR platform, through this platform, we do make use of it through the Ag Funding Consortium. So just because you put it in Argo doesn't mean it will be only ARDAR looking at it. It does go to this group of 18 members to see for the Funding Consortium call. So there are a couple of new requirements that we have added to the LOI, and these are based on some situations that we had that came up, and we want to go through those. So the first new question, I believe this is actually the first question after you enter your title and such, is that getting to the heart of if your institution requires approval to submit a letter of intent, have you obtained that internal institutional approval? I have a lot of I's in there for that letter of intent. So if you pick yes, great. If you have not obtained that, but maybe it's coming within a couple days, please check no, and or else your institution may not require internal approval for submission of LOIs. We've just run into a couple of snags here where this wasn't in place, and the same question will be asked at the full proposal stage, because we've actually run into issues with contracting. So this is just to prevent problems from later on. And it also gives you maybe that heads up of if you need that internal approval, you need to work backwards in terms of dates, because that doesn't happen instantaneously within institutions. The next thing, there's always been the project rationale box here, but what we have, we'll just go through, provide justification of the industry need for the project, how was the industry involved or engaged in the project, and what needs are going to be met. What we're now requesting is to specifically list what of the 18-member research priorities are actually being flagged. So when you go into Argo, this will be a live link. So when you click on that, or if you go to fundingconsortium.ca and you click on view the 2025-26 research priorities, it's going to pull up this list, and you can see that actually many of these groups have some updates to their research priorities. I really encourage you to spend time on this, looking at these different priorities because projects must address funder priorities. You might have some great idea, but if it doesn't resonate with at least one priority from these groups, submission to the funding consortium isn't your right place to seek funding. So I'm going to go through an example because I find examples are always helpful to lay it out. So let's say you are interested in forage barley breeding to increase milk production. So you might consider research priorities first from the Western Dairy Research Collaboration. So this is their updated list of research priorities. And you can see here, their first priority is forage breeding to improve yield, resistance, conservation, quality, and digestibility. So in that project rationale, you would want to be listing Alberta Milk, their priority in forage breeding. And then you go, there's other funders out there. So I look at SAS Barley. And under their breeding tab, fusarium head blight, the dawn in that is possibly creating issues with milk production. So that's a priority that we check off that works for both funders, and lodging resistance because my farmers can't harvest it when that barley is laying flat on the ground. So you're going to reference that. So SAS barley and these specific priorities. And then you go, well, let's look at WGRF. And under their research priorities, you see that barley is an eligible crop and breeding is, and a variety development is a priority of them. So you're going to list WGRF and these research priorities. And then ARDAR results here are providing an economic benefit to the producers, and you're going to flag that production efficiency and the feed utilization. So really encouraging you to take your priority or what you're looking at in your proposal and link it back to the member priorities. So quite an important thing here, because when you think of the funding consortium table gets 100 projects, if you can flag who you specifically want to have looking at this, that does a lot of great work to make sure it doesn't fall between the cracks there. So really encourage you to look at that priority document. Moving on, we've got kind of 3 questions now to just clarify the history of projects. So was your proposal submitted to other funders? If you click yes, it's going to populate this box. And this is where we're looking for you to say, you know what, I also submitted it to the Agriculture Development Fund, so the Saskatchewan government call. What was the submission number? Because many of these 18 groups are sitting at AFC, are also sitting at ADF. And when we read 2 different proposals that maybe have very similar names, a lot of similarities, we want transparency. Is it the same proposal submitted in 2 calls? Did you possibly submit your proposal also through CARP? Again, it's that transparency. So we are all clear, because these groups are looking at proposals across many different funding calls. Was an element of your proposal submitted to Genome Canada? Was a component of your research proposal part of an NSERC application that's awaiting a funding decision? If, that transparency is really important, that, if 50% of the budget may be coming from another source, we need to know that as funders. Or did you possibly submit a portion of a project or the whole project to ARDAR's irrigation call, and you're trying to, cover yourself here because this might approach multiple funders? So really, this is helping us with transparency. So the more transparency you can provide to the funders who are reviewing, the less incorrect assumptions we might make. So this is really helpful to yourself. The next thing, is it a new project or related to a previously funded project? If it is related to a previously funding project, you click on that and it will populate these 2 boxes. Again, sometimes we don't know if it is a follow-up proposal, if it is a phase 2. Being transparent about that, showing us the details, is super helpful. And it does make your application look better if we can clearly trace the origins of where the project came from. One of the things here is there might be concerns about duplication. We're not looking to duplicate existing research, but are you validating it in different environments? Are you scaling it up to be more industrially relevant from, that experimental lab stage to the field stage? This needs to be defined, or else, funders kind of go, I looked at something like that 3 years ago. I thought that was done. Providing transparency is really beneficial to you. How this new project adds value and is different. Again, similar vein, is it resubmission of a previous proposal? Let's say you had something declined in the 2024-25 funding consortium call, and you've fixed it up based on some feedback you've had, and you are resubmitting. Please let us know that it is a resubmission of project number 2024 F32, whatever the number is. It does just help with that transparency and that traceability. Next, we move on to the anticipated outcomes and deliverables. So here it's what specific outcomes are coming from your research, describing the value of the research to the end user. It might be economic, it might be animal welfare, animal safety, it might be for producers, or it might be for the wider industry at large. And what is the time frame? So again, I'm going to go through a couple of examples here. So this is the quantifiable outcome, and I want to show you where you link back to references in a state like this. So this project is proposed to increase the demand for canola meal due to market uncertainty associated with potential US tariffs. I do have a reference for this. So let's say there's 3.5 million metric tons of canola meal valued at $2 billion going to the US. And the new process or the new products that's going to be developed from that, your research could potentially replace 20% of the demand to more stable markets, potentially a Japan or somewhere else, where there's maybe not a tariff war going on. So then also, linking it back to Alberta Canola is looking for market development work, animal health and nutrition, and that's how you're linking to that. But you're also linking to the Canadian Canola Growers Association. They had a press release where they do quote, the canola meal valued at $2 billion going to that market is in a lot of uncertainty. So really showing why your project is necessary, and kind of quoting the industry need is incredibly beneficial to you as an applicant. A couple other things is, describing a lot of funders require the economic impact of your research. So this example was provided by Carly from one of our members here. And what is the feed cost per dozen eggs of the treatment? So, is treatment A, how much does that feed cost per treatment? Are there going to be savings or increased profitability from the treatment that you provide? Or, there isn't maybe a monetary value with addressing animal health and welfare. So from Alberta chicken producers, one of their priorities is addressing leg and foot pad health. And then the next part is, how will producers make decisions on this? If it's a monetary thing, it's simply going to cost them less input dollars, things like that. And another piece in this question on the anticipated outcomes and deliverables, they do reference the time frame. And I think a question there that I often, am struggling to quantify is how many years from the completion of your research project until that trait is commercially available to the farmer, in a variety that can be bought, in something that can be put into action on farm. Really helpful for understanding us trying to put things into TRL levels. Oh, and I did have pictures here that I unfortunately didn't pull up timely there. So now most of the AFC members, the producer research committees and the boards are evaluating research projects. So it's a farmer who's making the final decisions on that, but they are taking into consideration a peer scientific review. So you are writing towards multiple audiences, and you as applicants need to show the value and benefits to producers or the wider industry. So a bit of reiteration from that last slide. We've provided a little bit more guidance on what we're looking for in terms of methodology. And again, like on the funder priority, there is a live link here to the importance of a treatment list. And this is a two-paged article that was written that I will show you here. And it has some really excellent tips from those sitting on that review side of things. And we will also talk about the attachments or appendices that you can add that do help inform this review process. So we are looking for concise methodology descriptions, that napkin version of treatments, material used, experimental design, and comparisons. And it's at that full proposal stage where you need to make sure that your methodology will be able to pass a peer scientific review. So this was an article that George Clayton, myself, Murray Hartman, and Brian Rosenigel wrote a number of years ago. We wrote this when I was with Alberta Grains, and it gives some really excellent behind the curtain look at what will be helpful for you as applicants. I'd really encourage everyone to read this two-pager. I know it's written from a crop perspective, but the lessons are the same from the livestock side. So what essentially these the producer commissions are looking to is make sure the project will do what you as the researcher say it will do for the industry. Are the experiments aligned with the title and the objectives? I don't want to see a funding proposal that says I'm going to work on forage feed quality, and yet you're measuring feed grain quality, because there is that disconnect. So making sure the pieces all link together and that the budget is in line with the requested work. So a couple of examples that Carly kindly provided was, specify the experimental approach and design. Is it a randomized block design, a factorial design? How many reps? What is the sample size for each treatment group? And the treatment list really helps us as evaluators to define what is proposed to be studied. When I look at a funding proposal, the first thing I look at is actually that treatment list, because it is that bang on. Are you comparing A to B to C? And I want to understand what those details are. So if I take, this is a quote from that value of a treatment list. If the application says I'll compare 5 rates of nitrogen, when staff or producers are seeing it, they go, oh, that's a little bit vague. It's much less informative if you as the applicant can provide 5 nitrogen rates and actually specify what those are. Incredibly helpful there in that review process. An example from a livestock treatment, we, again, like in the previous, want to avoid vague statements such as different feed compositions. Instead, list specific treatments. So the control, the industry standard feed, what are the list of ingredients? What are their percentages? And then treatment A has got 90% of the energy and protein of our control. Treatment B has 110% of the energy and 90% of the control. And, of course, there may be other diets, but specifics are highly valuable. And again, avoid that vague speculative language like may include, possibly, or commercially important. It leads to interpretation that we want to just be transparent and understand what you are thinking, and how that will be clearly evaluated by the committee, but also through peer review. Now, the methodology set does reference appendices, and we want to keep these brief and focused on essential details. So sometimes a treatment list is hard to put into sentences. So I did just pull this from the Canadian Journal of Plant Science, but you can see these are the 4 treatments, but they are applied at 4 different growth stages with different fungicide products. So this table structure as an appendice really just helps at a quick glance those reviewing our proposal to understand what that treatment list looks like. Your study locations, sometimes a map is helpful and overlaid over top of soil types, environmental conditions, what kind of housing systems from the livestock world. And then also, sometimes it's very tough for us to understand the role of collaborators. So I've created a bit of a flow chart here where the PI of academic institution X is the lead. They have a collaborator at a federal institution Y, and that federal collaborator is going to do field trials for objectives 1 and 3 in the first 3 years of the study. And then they're also going to do nutritional analysis for objective 5 in those first 3 years. And then you have a collaborator at an academic institution who's going to do the economic analysis related to objective 6. So again, painting the picture so we can understand exactly what is going on there. And then sometimes that data collection part is challenging. So just created an example of a summary table with what's your methodology? When are you collecting that data? You know, what lab are you sending that to? Is it wet chemistry? Is it NIR analysis? Providing that detail in a table sometimes is more helpful than writing out sentences. We again want that methodology to link back to objectives. A couple examples here. In this feed study, optimizing feed formulations to improve productivity and sustainability in the layer industry. And what the treatments are going to do is they're going to test variations in energy and protein. So that example we looked at before to identify cost-effective formulations. And then an example from the crop world, looking to optimize N and P fertilizer rates to maximize canola yield. And the treatments may be what are current blends, who producer is large acre and just focused on logistical priorities. So one blend across all 5,000 acres, or comparing that with rates based on soil test recommendations, nutrient removal rates, crop insurance yield targets, what methodology is going to be used and how your methods are going to achieve the desired outcomes. So keep hanging in here with me, guys. Next is the research adoption, extension, and commercialization. And describe how the results of your project are going to get into the hands of the producers or value chain partners, and how it will directly benefit producers or that industry at large, and what was the involvement from project ideation through to the end of the project. So I've got an example here. I added this little flow chart. So this is a project got a lot of canola examples. That's been one of my portfolios. So I'm stealing from that and not trying to exclude here. So Canola Digest had a survey and of top industry priorities. And you know what? Herbicide resistant weeds comes out as number 2. So developing a treatment list, you as the researcher do that, but you're like, I'm not sure if there's value in both a pre-seed and a pre-emerge treatment. So it is going back to the industry to make sure that these treatments do resonate with the producers who are, needing to make these treatments work on farm. And then getting this out back to those who need it is working with a canola council agronomist for an edition of Canola Watch, and timed at the beginning of the weed control window. So just showing that you've really thought through the whole linkage from how producers created the need to how you're going to get that information back to that end user. In terms of the budget, not a lot of changes here. We do really want to specify, include your overhead, your science service charges, and other administration costs. Each individual funder of the 18 might have different rules around that. So we do encourage you to go back and check with what their policies are. But a couple of key things that I think would be really helpful is depending on the project, it's really helpful to break out budgets based on institution. For example, with ARDAR, we do have sustainable cap funds that cannot go to AAFC. So we need to understand which portion of the work is being done at AAFC and what is being done at academic institutions. What locations? You'll notice, there's Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta funders in this group. Some of those groups may struggle to fund out of province research. So if you can say, 60% of the sites are in Alberta, 40% are in Saskatchewan, the budget breaks out, accordingly, or whatever percent it is, that is really helpful, because when we go around that table and everyone kind of says, yes, I'm interested, yes, I'm interested. If, no one from Saskatchewan is interested in a project, it's going to be really hard to command Saskatchewan dollars for that project. So helping us to understand that, helping us to understand committed funds from other sources. So let's say you have an NSERC that you're going to use as leverage in this project, or it's covering graduate students. Please just be transparent about that. If you have funds that you have requested, but you're waiting for a decision, please let us know about that. Details of in-kind support and any other factor that might be relevant. I do want to reference crop type. We often get an application that is part canola, part wheat. If we want both canola and wheat to come to the table, it's important to understand the budget breakout for the different crop types. So it does, when you look at who's reviewing the proposals, how they're reviewing it, everyone has limited amount of funds. It's really important to lay that out for us as at this review stage. And the other thing I want to just flag is that you guys do submit sometimes some great projects, but as I said, and as I think the world is seeing, money is tight, and not all projects can be funded just due to cost constraints. And it's unfortunate, but it is the economic realities. And we as grower producer-led in organizations do need to be responsible back to those grower dollars. One other thing about the budget and going back to the treatment lists and the data collection, that does help us understand the scope of the budgets. So if this is from the value of a treatment list, if your proposal says several samples will be used to isolate bacterial strains, we don't know how many samples are being taken. Is it 5 or is it 100? And that, of course, has budget implications. This is, again, from Carly, linking what data is collected and how often, ensuring that it aligns with the study objectives. So, you're measuring daily egg production, feed intake, feed conversion ratios, weekly egg weight, shell thickness, biweekly body weight, biweekly manure nitrogen content. The more frequently you measure, of course, the more money you will be asking for. So this is really important to help us understand the budget realities of the project. And if you are using specialized equipment or technique, just briefly describe them. And I think if you're doing a feed analysis, is it going to be NIR or wet chemistry? Very different budgets. So quickly add that descriptor there. A couple of realities of the review process that the AFC goes through. You as researchers have a very tough job, but we do, your success level is improved when you make it easy for those reviewing your proposals to understand and evaluate what you are proposing. Simple, straightforward language is much easier to understand. And these producer research committees, if they are looking at things that it's overlapping with seeding time, harvest time, they have 30 proposals in front of them. You are commanding pulling their time away from harvesting a crop that's going to pay the bills at the end of the day, or from calving season. And just being mindful of that, and the easier it is for those farmers to evaluate it and be real clear on what they're going to get from this investment in your research, that goes a really long ways when they have a lot to get through in a short time frame. The more quickly you can help the reviewer understand at that producer research committee table, the more favorable your proposal will be looked upon. And that being said, those peer-reviewed scientific reviews of your proposal do inform decision making. So if it doesn't pass on the science, the producer committee is going to go, wow, it got a 25% rating. I'm probably not going to look at it because I do have other competing priorities. So it's an incredibly challenging balancing job that you guys are achieving here, and balancing both the producer, evaluators who make the money decisions, and those making the science guidance decisions. So just to wrap up, some of the changes on the LOI template, that declaration of the internal institutional approval for submission, um, more clarity on duplications if you submitted it to a previous call, if it is a resubmission, if it is building on something else, a lot of clarity on that. And then I think a big difference is specifically listing the member priorities under that project rationale box there. And we've provided more guidance in terms of tips to write the methodology section. I know we're not at the full proposal stage, and this is, 10 steps out, but just want to touch upon it. The changes listed in the LOI will transfer over to the full proposal. If you are describing an economic analysis, because many of those of us reviewing these proposals do have that as a requirement, if it's relevant to the project, what is the current or future value of the research to the target industry? How are you going to do that economic analysis? And just being mindful, it could be producers or the wider industry at large. Where is this research going at the end of the day? We have really provided a lot of additional instructions for the research adoption, extension, and commercialization sections of the FER proposal. So when you go into Argo, if you're invited for full proposal, we've also gone through the adoption piece, but I want to touch on, there's a lot more information and guidance on extension for the proposal and the IP and commercialization. Want you to think through this, what's your message? Who is it going to? What is the target audience? It might be producers, but it might be government policy staff, regulators, the commodity groups. Understanding that each of these groups have different extension needs, if we can call it that. When are you going to put that research out? And a big flag is that we've run into it a couple times. If you are planning to work with a third party for the extension of your research, ensure that that group has agreed to work with you on this collaboration. We don't want to, oh, guess what? Now I have funding. Now I'm going to go talk to that group about that. Do that planning ahead of time. And this is a really great link. It is an Ontario resource, but gives some really helpful tips on knowledge translation and transfer. And then quickly on the IP and commercialization, if there are multiple groups, we want you guys to think through, if Ag Canada and academic institutions and a private for-profit group are all collaborating, how is that IP going to be divided? It isn't something we want to have coming up when we start getting to, I won't sign this contract. So again, thinking through that and having those conversations now is the planning time. And then there is going to be a checkbox of a disclaimer. If you have late reporting with any of these 18 AFC members, get that wrapped up, because we as funders, when funds are limited, can't give new funds to someone who hasn't spent the old funds if they're behind in their reporting. So a good time to catch up on that if you have some late outstanding reports, so you don't get to being uncomfortable when that box comes up. So again, just wrapping up the overarching concepts from this importance of a treatment list. Producer-supported research is important to the long-term health of the ag industry. Me sitting in the ARDAR seat, if all of the producer groups that I'm looking at a proposal say, this brings no value to my research, I'm going to have a real hard time selling it to the ARDAR board. If I'm getting feedback of it doesn't bring value to the producer. So thinking about who your funders are, who you want to be working with, and being mindful of their needs. The producer commissions are responsible and accountable for spending those levy dollars to benefit the producers who are paying those levy dollars. So it does have to show value back to the farm. There are scientific experts brought in that these producer groups rely on, and they are there to help the farmers understand what they are paying for and the likelihood of it delivering. And that treatment list, I really want to emphasize how valuable that is. Listing your experimental design, your detailed description of data collection, and it helps producers understand what they are paying for in their research. And these are the timelines. As I mentioned, the AFC LOI call opened on February 18th, so this past Tuesday. We're doing the webinar today. The LOI deadline closes April 1st. This is 2 weeks earlier because we're trying to let those producer committees, if they are reviewing proposals, 2 weeks before maybe they're getting in the seat and started seeding down south, or the busyness in the livestock industry, giving a little more flexibility there. The full proposal invite will come out on June the 2nd, with full proposals being due on July 23rd, 1 week earlier. Again, trying to allow producers to look at stuff before that harvest crazy window starts, with funding decisions being announced pre-Christmas. And now I am going to take a breath and breathe, and I'm going to ask Amanda to read out questions and see what we've got.
Thanks, Sheri. That was great. So first off, just to start, if anyone would like a link to that Alberta Grains article that Sheri mentioned, a link is in the chat. So you can
Thank you, Amanda.
yeah, absolutely. So we've got a few in queue here. So first off, I did not quite get the information about the required proportion of external funding to allow the proposal to be considered for AFC funding.
So I think you are asking about matching. And I would say there are not maybe hard, fast rules about that. With sustainable cap dollars that ARDAR is administering, there is a 60-40 match required for that pool of money. So there is that. But if, there's always value, all of us as funders get more value out of leverage. Those, when, let's say ARDAR puts in $3, if we have a match of, $3 from another group, $2 from another group, $1 from another group, our metrics and reporting all look so much better when we partner. Or, if Alberta Grains puts in $1, they want to see, $4 in other matching partners. So the more matching and leverage you can get, the stronger your proposal will be.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, next question. Consortium members all represent established crop and livestock sectors. How much openness is there to crops or animal species not represented on the consortium?
I think if you go in and it would be the WGRF on the crop side, they do have a list of crop types. They did recently expand, I believe, to include dry beans. So check out their website. They do cover some of those smaller crops, and ARDAR does not have limits on which crop types they can invest in. So do look there. Your Alberta Innovates is not limited by crop type, but you are correct. Yeah, a lot of the other ones are fairly limited. That doesn't mean there's no home for some of those new and novel crop types.
Excellent, thank you. It looks like potato growers of Alberta have no current requirements for priorities.
Yeah, so I think potato growers of Alberta, and I might lean on Trevor here, my colleague, to weigh in, but they're looking at a slightly different funding model, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't potentially consider something coming through this call. I do think working one of the things I probably didn't say is if you have something that you are working with the McCains, little potato growers, it's time to have a conversation once you have ideation and having that conversation with PGA and the other players that you've brought together. Conversations go a long way.
Thank you. This next one might be more of a technical issue, so we might require a bit more information if you could send it our way. But Sheri, just in case you have any guidance on this, I do not see the LOI option on my page after logging into Ardar, nor am I able to see the priorities under the hyperlink. So I think that second piece might be more of a technical issue, but can you speak to the LOI options?
Yeah, like if you can go to fundingconsortium.ca, maybe Amanda, if you could put that in the chat there and try following that link through the Agriculture Funding Consortium. It has been working, but if not, please send us a message there and we will troubleshoot any technical issues for sure.
Great, thank you. Um, in the project rationale, we say we are addressing the needs of X, Y, and Z organizations listed in the AFC priority list.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Nice and easy. The question about have you submitted this proposal to any other funders is this only for the current funding cycle, or do you want to know about past years where it has been declined?
Yeah, so there is, I believe there are actually three. So have you submitted it currently to other funders? Have you submitted it in the past? And does it build on? So there are three separate questions there.
Great. Okay. Can a national organization with head office outside of the three prairie provinces apply for projects in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba?
I think everything is, it's a gray, it's not a hard no. Have a conversation with the industry group that you who of those groups would you be targeting and start with a conversation before you go to a whole bunch of work on an LOI, just to make sure it fits within scope.
Perfect. Okay. Have you submitted this proposal to any other funders? I guess that's the question. Do you want it flagged if we have submitted it to previous calls where it wasn't funded, i.e. the AFC call in 2024, or do you just want us to report if we're submitting it to another call this year?
Yeah, so again, that is two separate boxes. You know what? I am just going to go back to that because this is the second time being asked that. So I do want to make sure there is clarity here. So if you guys can still see my screen, have you submitted this to any other funders? So this refers to current. Is it been submitted to any other funders? And then is this resubmission of a previous proposal? And yes, so if you submitted it last year and it was declined and you're resubmitting this year, if you submitted it 2 years ago and it was declined and you didn't get back to it, but you're getting back to it now, we do want you to give that history and really indicate what significant changes you made to the proposal that is making it more relevant to funders now, or if there were technical issues that you've addressed those.
Great, thank you. And she did let me know that she asked that before the second box was shown. So I think that's
Okay.
all. All good. Okay, as a scientist, I don't have a great handle on the economic impacts. Are there resources for looking that up?
Yeah, and I think that's where you want to partner with others. Talk to groups who are economists in agriculture. They're certainly at academic institutions in Alberta, Saskatchewan. There's some within Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Partner up with someone. We don't want people working outside of their comfort level, but we really want collaborations to get all the right experts pulling together on projects. So you can do a great job of that.
I believe this question came in right around the anticipated outcomes and deliverable section. How would you know, um, how would you know this information if that's the point of the research to figure out how much would something increase or decrease?
Okay. I think you are going into the project though, so you won't know the specifics of, but are you anticipating that you are going to, here, if we go to these examples, um, you must have an idea of, you might not know which one of these feed formulations is going to be the winner, but might it reduce feed costs by, I don't even know if 30 cents per dozen eggs is reasonable or 5 cents. What kind of range are you looking for even in terms of the economics? So definitely you're not going to get specifics because that is why you're doing the research, but put us in the ballpark. Is it going to, maybe be a 5% yield increase, shorter um, days to market, those kind of things? You must have some idea with your research that is informing your treatments.
Great. If we are waiting for an NSERC decision and part of the proposal for NSERC overlaps with the proposal submitted to AFC, how does AFC decide to assign funds if the proposal is selected? Would it be more of a communication with the PI to know if other funds have already been obtained close to the AFC decision date?
So I'm just going to quote an example for a project that was submitted last year, and the PI wrote in the budget saying 80, we have 15% of the budget secured or requested through NSERC, and the other 85% we are looking to support here. And we will keep you in the loop as soon as the decision is communicated. So that transparency is so helpful. And then that liaison will be getting back to you to say, hey, what's the status update on that NSERC? Have you heard anything? Because that does inform us as funders. If this is a top priority and that NSERC 15% doesn't come in, we know that for that project to proceed, the funding partners interested in it are looking at a bigger budget. So really be clear on that, and there will be that back and forth communication when you're waiting for a decision.
Thanks, Sheri. Should you identify benefits to consortium members that have not identified the topics as a particular research priority? For example, pollinator health for canola or pulse.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Alberta beekeepers are sitting at the table, and if you have work within an area that could resonate with them, you should be flagging that for sure. Because it would be, I guess I'm just a little bit longer explanation. You'd rather Alberta beekeepers look at your proposal and say no than not even have it on their radar.
Excellent. How would you advise that we handle uncertainty in capacity? For example, if you hire an MSc student to do field samples, you don't know how much work they'll be able to accomplish, how many fields they'll be able to sample, how far away, etc. For insects, we have to go to fields where the insects are, and we don't know that in advance.
Yeah, and I think that is a tricky art. So there's, I think, the complexity of making sure you have the student there in, April and ready to go and trained up and able to drive vehicles. Um, Lay out the scenario of, that best case scenario is we get, I don't know, 75 fields sampled by the master student, with the caveat that the minimum required to have this project proceed scientifically might be 40, or just kind of throwing some numbers out, but be transparent.
Okay, great. Can any changes be made between the LOI and full proposal stage?
So certainly as things evolve, I think what you are tied to is that budget. So being mindful of that. And there is the very real possibility that when the funders review your LOI, they may say, we'd ask you to add this treatment, and of course there would be, or this data collection piece, and there will be budget implications. And we realize that when we are asking. So I would say it is not set in stone, but you can't submit an LOI and do a complete about face. It might be tweaking, maybe I'd more say.
Great. The deadline for this LOI will come at the same time as reporting on the previous project. Previously, LOIs were due April 15th. Is there any reason why these times were shifted earlier? It can cause complications when asking our org to approve.
Yeah, no, and as I mentioned, it is to allow that longer time when we have groups who their farmer committees are reviewing this. If the LOIs can come in 2 weeks earlier, so that April 1st to April 15th, and they can get through stuff before that seeding window is hitting in full fledged. So that it is a balancing act. And yeah, I guess as you know, you have reporting dates coming, and just trying to stay ahead of it. And I realize everyone is busy.
Absolutely. Does AFC have a non-disclosure policy? Should industry applicants be concerned about revealing sensitive information when preparing LOIs and proposals?
Yeah, I think if you have confidential information, sensitive information, that needs to be highlighted, flagged, wherever it is in the full proposal right off the start. Make us aware of that.
Okay. Do you have offline templates for the LOI full proposal in the Argo system?
I'm actually going to put that back to Amanda. Do you guys have there used to be, I'm not sure if there currently are.
Yeah, there definitely used to be. Let's take that back to the research team and just
Okay,
confirm that they're up to date.
okay, we will put that on the to-do list.
Um, does in-kind contribution count?
I would say yes, but it's understanding what context that is in, what that looks like, and for sustainable cap, there might be caveats around what is eligible to be leveraged as in kind. So if you do have in kind that you are not sure about, disclose it, and then that is why we have that liaison to go back to the PI and have a conversation about it. If it might not be eligible, then we can discuss that.
Great. For early career researchers and researchers who are new to the ag sector, are there any mechanisms for pre-LOI discussions with consortium members to help refine project ideas?
Yeah, I think, that's where you go through checking with that priority list. And maybe that's probably a better thing to flash up on the screen for you guys to look at is this list. If you are targeting a specific industry, you should be starting to build relationships with the funders in that organization, because hopefully you have a long career relationship with those individuals who are funding your research.
Great, thank you. Would any funding here apply to Alberta lamb producers as we do not have any representation on the committee?
Yeah, and that's where I would definitely say that ARDAR would be the group that you would be talking to.
You mentioned briefly about indirect cost of research. So when applicants are crafting their proposals targeting different funders that have different policies on overhead rate, how do you set up their budget in this case, or can that be adjusted later when the liaison is assigned and in contact?
Yeah, I think you want to be, because you do have to put a budget into the LOI. And let's say you target 4 different funders, go onto their websites and see what their overhead policies are. And if you have a lack of clarity, then please follow up with the research contact in that organization.
I see specific priorities from ARDAR. The priority related to climate mitigation strategies appear to meet the objectives of my potential proposal. Can I select ARDAR as the targeted evaluating group?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. As a researcher in industry, can we apply for both the Accelerating Agricultural Innovations 2.0 and the AFC funding call with the same project, or should these LOIs be two separate projects?
I would say that if it is, that's where we're asking for that clarity of disclosure. If, I'm sorry, I wasn't 100% clear if you've already submitted something to Accelerating Ag. If you have, I think you are the trade-off, let's say maybe you're making, is that Accelerating Ag, we have a continual intake and a continual review. Nothing will be approved at this point if you submitted today for the 2025 growing season, but you're also limiting yourself to ARDAR as a funder. If your project is more suited to multiple funding groups, then putting that through the funding consortium would probably be a better option. So I'm not sure I 100%, but I understood your question, but I do think there are trade-offs that you should consider when submitting to the two different streams.
Great, thank you. What if I resubmit a proposal that was funded but later withdraw due to lack of industry in-kind collaboration?
Yeah, then I think if you're planning to resubmit it and it was flagged as that was the reason for the decline, then definitely do that work on the side of getting more industry collaboration to put forward a revised version of that proposal. And again, quote which project number that was and how you've improved that.
Thank you. My project is relevant to greenhouse farming. Will AFC consider these funding proposals?
Yeah, and again, I think it will be more relevant to the ARDAR, potentially Alberta Innovates, depending on what you're growing. If WGRF, I'm not sure if there would be a fit there, but those would be the ones that have more are not as commodity specific. So go and check out the websites and your particular situation and see what you can match up there so that you do target it appropriately.
Great. We are working with AI optical grading of our processing potatoes. There's huge efficiencies to be gained with this for our industry. Who would I contact to quantify the gains for this? Can I hire a student, or what would be the specific project?
Yeah, and I don't want to give project specific advice, but I think, what I hear is something like have a conversation with Alberta Innovates, with ARDAR, with Potato Growers of Alberta in that situation. So linking back, really, if there is one page that you should spend considerable time checking out all the links on is which ones on this list here are most relevant for your project and your situation, and digging into the websites of those individual members.
Thank you. Is funding from the consortium eligible for cost matching through NSERC Alliance? If we intend to apply for cost matching where the industry funds need to be secured prior to application, how should we plan the budget? If we budget assuming the cost matching will be successful, then the project could be dead in the water if the NSERC Alliance does not come through. If we
So
budget,
I believe that NSERC Alliance is not eligible for leveraging with sustainable cap. So if I heard you right, if it's NSERC Alliance, do not plan to match or leverage those funds.
thank you. And yes, it was NSERC Alliance.
Okay.
Applying from Manitoba, do we have to have collaborators from Alberta for our LOI to be considered?
I think when you look at who the funding partners are, there certainly would be benefit from that. Manitoba Crop Alliance is listed, so you'd want to make sure there is some connection with them, I would say. And there does have to be, if you want to command funds from, some of the Alberta groups or the Saskatchewan groups, you do have to indicate what benefit would be for Saskatchewan dollars to be spent in Manitoba, what benefit goes back to that Saskatchewan farmer or Alberta. So being, again, Ag Funding Consortium is not a legal entity, and it is all these individual groups have to answer to their individual boards for the value of the dollars they are spending to their producers, who those came from.
Great, thank you. And Karen Schmidt in the chat let us know that some consortium funds are eligible to match NSERC Alliance, like the commodity groups, just not sustainable cap. So
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Karen. Appreciate that clarity.
And then final question, how much is the maximum amount for requested funds through this call?
I guess we don't have a maximum amount. Each project is evaluated on merit and what it is proposing to do. But I do think there are funding realities out there of what groups have available, and it depends. Not what you want to hear, but it does depend.
Sure. A couple more questions rolling in. Can you explain sustainable cap?
Okay, sustainable cap is federal dollars that ARDAR administers for the province of Alberta. So these federal dollars cannot go to agriculture and agri-food Canada scientists or institutions, and they do require that 60-40 leverage. Go on to the ARDAR website and find out more details about that. In Saskatchewan, they are administered through that ADF call. So sustainable cap dollars, there's a lot of complexity around there, and I don't want to give any. You need to look further and have a conversation, more than just a quick Q&A in this session.
Absolutely. And I'm going to also just drop a link to
Sure.
the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership.
Thank you, Amanda.
Are you accepting forage crop related proposals? I can't find BCRC or other forage related commissions in the AFC member priority list.
Yeah, absolutely. Like last year, AFC did collaborate with BCRC. Alberta Beef does collaborate with BCRC, and ARDAR does as well. So forage proposals are certainly within the scope of projects that do get funded by these member organizations. And Karen just put in the chat there, ABP does fund forage proposals.
Excellent. A question in the chat. Where does my tax fit in the conversation?
So I think, you've got that student funding part. So you want to disclose that as part of your proposal, and those evaluating it will look at it. ARDAR will look at it as, the more you can pull funds from other groups, the stronger your proposal will be.
Just a question for clarification. Did you mention that ARDAR funds cannot go to federal scientists because it is from sustainable cap funding?
So ARDAR does have a sustainable cap pot of money and main funds. So we do have funds that if we can fund a project through Sustainable Cap, because that does have an end date of March 31st, 2028, with spending needing to be completed by December 31st, 2027. We want to allocate those funds and use them up so they don't go back to government coffers, of course. But we do fund agriculture and agri-food scientists through main funds. So we have flexibility because we have different pots of money.
Thank you for clarifying. There are currently no more questions on my end.
Well, I want to thank Amanda for moderating the questions and going through that, and for all the attendance here. Really overwhelmed with just how many people signed on, how many people stayed, even though we went overtime here. And Amanda, I do believe will be pulling together a survey so that we've got a little bit of feedback in terms of what was valuable in this survey, and if you'd like to see things again like this. So thank you very much, and we do look forward to seeing your proposals in the LOI call. So thank you very much for your attendance, and have a nice day, everyone, and enjoy the warm weather.
Thanks all.